Hey YouTube, what are we doing this week? We got to put camshafts in, push those valves down and open. And we've got another cover that needs to be cleaned up and painted. Welcome to Urban Monk TV. So I've got my, call it the valve cover, camshaft cover, valve cover bolts, so we won't need those today. Here are the journals to hold down the exhaust cam, and intake cam journals, and then another camshaft chain guide, and this front guide here. So I'm sure happy now that I labeled everything in bags nice and clearly. And another thing I had labeled clearly were my tappet buckets. This is number 1 intake, number 4 intake. Let's make that the front of the engine. So left and right, front and rear. 3 intake, 2 exhaust. You get the drift. 2 intake. I just wrote with a Sharpie right on these things because the shim goes down on top of this anyways. 3 exhaust, 4 exhaust, 1 exhaust. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then there are my shims. I have in my journal the order that I had those in, but that's all going to change because I got a different camshaft that has better lobes on it, so I'm going to have to do some measuring and shim work, I'm sure. But let's get these lubricated and at least put on top of the valves. So as we put these in, we're going to lubricate, and you guessed it, engine assembly lube. All around the outside. And then get a little, I want to get a drop right where that contacts the top of the valve. That is number 1 exhaust. Exhaust, of course, being this side. Number 2. These should slide in really easy, don't force them. If you're not lined up, don't force it in. Yeah, nice and easy. And you get the drift. Exhaust and intake. 1, 2, 3, 4. And my last one. There we go. Buckets are in. Time to put our camshafts down on. Okay, as you will recall from my very early on videos on this GS550 project, I had an intake camshaft that, was it the intake or the exhaust? I don't know, go back and watch it. One of them, the lobes were below spec, so I went online on eBay and I ordered up a set of used cams. And so I've got 4 cams here, 2 of each, intake and exhaust. And I used my calipers, get a set of these, like $9.99. It's good enough for what we're doing. And made sure that I'm using the cams with the wider diameter on those lobes. So I'll get more lift for a longer period of time with this set of cams than I would have with the old. In fact, one of those lobes was just completely out of spec according to the service manual. So would it have run? Yes. Would it have run a long time? Probably not. Not well. So I've done that. I've measured these lobes using my caliper, and these 2 are what make the set with the greatest lift and all lobes within spec. And another thing I should mention on camshafts, you know, if you can't find a used set of cams for your particular motorcycle, you can take these into a machine shop and they can actually, it's like welding added material on here, and then they sand that or grind that down, machine it down to, you know, to make a new load with more lift. And frankly, if you wanted to increase performance, you could you know, really get some lift on that load. But so machine shops can help you out there. So now the other thing we need in order to have our crankshaft aligned properly with our camshaft, we have to be able to know the timing mark position on the crankshaft, and that means putting our advance and our points back together because they have the timing marks on the advance. So real quickly, I just want to talk a little bit about this advance and how it works. Essentially, this has only one position that it can ride on the crankshaft. Crankshaft has a little pin that goes in here, so this whole piece rotates with the crankshaft. And as you accelerate the engine speed, as RPMs go up, you want to advance your timing. And so this little cam, it's hard to see, but there's actually a lobe to this, is what rotates around as this thing is be spinning this way on that side of the engine. It rotates around and opens up the points, which are straddling it, and sends signal to the ignition system to send spark to either 1 and 3 or 2 and 4. And frankly, it's always sending, you know, 1 and 3 is getting spark. You know, 1 might be actually on the power stroke and 3 might be on the exhaust stroke, but it'll still get a spark at that point, if that makes sense to you. Anyway, so advancing the timing is about getting this lobe to turn some, and as this thing spins faster, these weights, these are actually weights, centrifugal force forces them out. And so I'll try to simulate that centrifugal force by turning here, and watch what happens to that cam. You see how it rotates on the center shaft, so this lobe moves, and that advances when the spark is sent to the spark plugs. So no computers here, folks, just good old-fashioned physics. And so, as I mentioned, here's our crankshaft, here is that pin that slides into that slot, so you really can't get this installed wrong. There's only one way it's going to fit on, and it will always be in the right position. And then we've got this bolt to hold it on, and the torque on this is 16.5 to 20 pound-feet. I'm splitting the difference and then converted to inch-pounds so that I'm using the torque wrench that's appropriate for being within its range of operation. And so I'm going 16.5, that turns out to be 198 inch-pounds, call it, you know, 200 inch-pounds. So that's what I'm going to do. Let me grab my torque wrench and then I'll get the Newton meters on that too. Okay, so I'm at 198 inch-pounds, and I did look up Newton meters. That would be 22.4. Again, you've got a range there, so here I'm up to 200, so let's see, 185, 98. Okay. I wonder if I'm going to be, yeah, I'll be turning my crankshaft here, so I need to get something to stop the crankshaft from spinning. So here's what I'm going to use to hold the crankshaft from spinning. I've just got one of these band wrenches to go around the, that's the generator magnet rotor. So I'll just hold that in the opposite direction and straddle the motor. It's a nice thing about small engines like this is you can reach both sides of it at the same time. There it is. Click. So satisfying. You're right, Michael Choi. very satisfying when you reach the click. Next part to go on is just this little plate, but it has your timing mark on it right there. I don't know if you can see that, but it's right there. And that just goes on just like this. 1, 2, 3 bolt holes there, and there's the timing mark, which will line up with those marks on the thing, and then we got to get our points on here. I'm gonna have to spread these apart a little to get them over that cam. Okay. There, and now this is going to require some timing, but as far as our mark is concerned, there is only one position for that. So while this whole timing plate rotates, that comes into play later on, not right now. As far as what we're concerned about lining up the camshafts, that's all about that mark within this hole that's on that back plate, if that makes sense. Hope so. And then just one more thing I'm going to do while I'm in here. There's a little felt pad that rides against that cam. And I'm going to just put some, I can't get that lined up, just put some grease on it. And that keeps that cam lubricated against these points. And boy, it really doesn't take very much at all. Just the smallest little bit. And as that heats up, that grease will absorb into that felt and just keep that cam lubricated. Hope my head isn't blocking the view there. And so now I can rotate my crankshaft with a 19mm wrench here, being careful about the cam chain, which is still hanging here on my bungee cord hook. What I need to do is get the timing mark on that advance governor. There's two sides to it, the 1 and 4 side and the 2 and 3 side. And have I got that right? Yeah, 1 and 4. I need to line up the T timing mark, so it's literally a T mark on there. You'll see it, rewind the video, and with that mark on that plate that we installed, and it's got to be on the 1 and 4 side, so don't get the T on the 2 and 3 side. Flashlight helps a lot here. Oh, I gotta get my wrench off the other side. There. So looking through that little hole is the T and the two marks, one on the advance and the other on that is the timing mark on the plate. And you can't tell right now, but this is the, it's difficult, it's the 1 and 4 side. You can see that by looking down at this angle, so it's printed in there. You've got T and F, 1 and 4, and T and F on 2 and 3. Now the next thing I want to do carefully without rotating the crankshaft is just make sure that my cam chain is tight down around the crankshaft, and that I don't have, you know, a link that got, I don't know how to say it, kittywampus down there, and that I'm just nice and snug. And once I'm sure of that, keep the tension on it, hang it there, recheck my timing mark, that's on strobe, and see I moved it just slightly when I was doing that, so there. I want to keep that indexed perfect. Okay, so now I've moved the cam chain to the rear of the engine, or the intake side, and I've got this cam chain guide and tensioner. It's just a big spring with some pretty tough plastic, or it's almost rubber-like, but that goes down. It's got these, I don't know if you can see that. This is the top, and you just slide this baby down, and there's a little pressure there against the crankshaft. Just push it down in right here. Okay, so this is my exhaust camshaft as indicated by the EX here. It has an Aero 2 and an arrow 1. We want to position this with the arrow 1 lining flush like this with the top of the cylinder head. But of course we want to do that with the cam chain around it. And again, being doubly sure that this T-mark has not moved, because every time you touch that chain, you got to recheck your indexing on the timing mark. And one other thing I want to mention, each of these camshafts has an R and an L, right and left side. So the right side of the engine is the timing side, the point side. Left side is the generator side. So it's from the perspective of sitting on the bike. So another thing I've been debating right now is, before I put these cams on, do I put the shims into the buckets? I can always put them in later with this tool that goes around the camshaft and presses down on the bucket and against the valve. But there's 8 of them here. It's quite a bit. The other problem is that now that I've ground these valves, everything's going to be different. And I'm probably going to need to replace many of those shims that I put in now. But maybe I'll get lucky and you know, have some that I don't have to deal with. So I think I am putting the shims in now. So I'm going to go back to my journal, look at which shims I had in which position, and for lack of a better logic, I'm just going to put those same shims down. And later I'll have to go around, measure everything, and replace shims. So that's the attack I'm going to take, is put the shims in now based on how they were when I disassembled the engine. So going back to my journal, here's all the shims. 1, 2, 3, 4, exhaust intake, and time to put them back in. And so in exhaust number 1 I had a 2.7 or 2.70, so I'm going to put that in there, and you guessed it, engine assembly lube. Both sides. Exhaust 1. Oh, the other thing I should mention is put the shims in, which I just did it wrong, I have to turn this over. Put the shims in with the marking where, you know, this says 2.8 on this side. Put that down so that the cam is riding against the other side. That way you don't run a risk of wearing those numbers off. This is a really hard piece of steel. It shouldn't wear off, but just in case. And one more thing, now is a good time to be thinking ahead to when I'm going to be changing these shims. These buckets have this little slot here, and they can be there, they can be way down here. That's a very difficult position, because that's what you use when the camshaft is in. You come in there with a screwdriver, you know, like this, and the tolerances are pretty tight to get your shim out and grab it with a little pliers or forceps. So I've gone ahead and lined that little notch up on all the buckets up toward the center in anticipation of myself having to do that, to take it easy on myself. So thinking ahead. So grabbing my chain carefully, trying not to rotate the crankshaft. Checking my timing mark one more time. That is indexed properly. Camshaft, right and left. Mark number 1 is going to come toward the front. So this may take a couple of different stabs. Oh, another thing, I got to put engine assembly lube in these journals. Getting ahead of myself. Let's do it again. So now at this point I've got tension against one of the valves. So I need to get that mark lined up as best I can. Get my vice grip out. Clamp this guy down. Got some interference somewhere. Take your time and take it easy. If it's going in hard, then something's wrong. There we go. Okay. So that should be right. Yeah. Well, problem there is I'm not lined up. Now my one is up at an angle, needs to be flush. So I'm working against this valve, and this will be tricky. But my timing mark is still on. So what I've actually done here is placed the cam teeth on the sprocket into the chain with that arrow actually going down a little bit, not level, because as I press then with the vice grip and clamp this in this way, it should rotate flush. And so I may have to take a couple different stabs at this, but again, I'm working against a really difficult spring on that valve. What I don't want is a bunch of rotation. Okay, so I've compressed my valve, I'm down in the journal, and I'm perfectly lined up with that number 1 mark. So that's good. I'm in a good place. So that's kind of the trick, is to get it down a bit, and then as you rotate your cam in, it ends up flush where it should be. Somebody using my driveway as a turnaround. Next bit is this top cam chain guide. Something on this side. That just slides right down in there. Chain rides on it. So for the intake cam, that has a mark, right side, arrow pointing up with a 3 by it. And so that'll ride there, of course. You want that 3 straight up and down. Now that the exhaust cam is in with the number 1 lined flush with the cylinder head, it has a 2 that is pointed straight up, and there's a pin in the chain right above that. And I need to have 20 pins to this number 3. So I need to count out 20 pins. Just for my own reference, I'm going to use a little bit of a grease pen, and I'm just going to put the slightest little mark on that 20th pin to be my guide. You don't have to have it, but you know, that's how I'm doing it. So if you don't have a grease pen, just keep track of which one's number 20. 1, 2, 3, 4, 17, 18, 19, 20. Tiny mark. Counting it again. Okay, so I've got the intake cam loosely in here. I've got the number 3 lined up with my 20th pin. I did need to pull this up slightly just to get room to get the cam in, but now that it's in and the 3 is lined up with that pin, I can slide that back down and start moving my cam into place. There. So now just one more recheck on my timing. I am on the T mark down here. There's a little tension there because of that valve on number 2 exhaust that I'm pushing down. I have number 2, or this is absolutely flat, I've got 20 pins. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, right above the number 3 on the intake. So now it's time to just clamp that intake down with my vice grip. Again, we've got assembly lube in the journals. Worst case scenario, at least put some engine oil in there and clamp it down. I'm going to go on this side because that's where the tension is. There. And I'm actually pressing down on intake number 1 with some pressure there. So that is it. 3 is lined up. 1 is lined up. T is lined up. All we need now is to get cam chain tensioner on there and tighten this system all up. One quick showing here. So there's the number 2. Number 1 is down there. Arrow is lined up flush with the top of the pin. 20 pins over to the arrow number 3. And you can see I've got my little white grease mark on that one. So there's your timing. On our journals, you may see down right in here, there is a C in a triangle and a D in a triangle. And if we come over here, oops, sorry, C and D, arrows pointing forwards. So easy enough to know which one goes where. So these are A, B, C, and D. Just match them up. And of course, assembly lube where these ride on the journals of the bearings. Get the dowels lined up. Torque spec on these bolts is 6 to 8.5 pound-feet. I'm going close to 7, so I will be, what is that? I'm going to do 87 inch-pounds, which in Newton meters is 9.8 Newton meters. With these caps, as I draw them down, I like to first torque the 2 that have the dowels on them so that I'm getting aligned as I go down, and just go a little bit at a time, back and forth. So I'll just bring that down using only those 2 for now. And that snugs everything up. There you can see my vice grip got loose as that began to hold it. And if I'm doing the 2 with the dowels, then I know I'm getting lined up. So let me get the rest of these and then we'll torque them. Okay, 87 inch-pounds. There's 87. Going crisscross. A little at a time. There's my click. I'm just going to go back around and check them all one more time. So, cams are on. Okay, so that's going to be a wrap for this episode. We got the camshafts in, we got our timing all set, valve tappets are in, tappet shims, though we're going to have to change those later. Next step is to just get this cleaned up. I didn't get to this today. I've done so much on painting already that I'm not going to do a video on how to paint this part. I'm going to paint this part like I painted the other parts. And next steps after this, once we get that all buttoned up, is to put in our clutch and polish up some covers, put our stator and generator back together, and we'll move forward. Hey, if you like these videos, please click like and subscribe if you want to keep up to date with all the new episodes as they come out. And thanks for watching.
Da 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 da.